In a brightly lit hall filled with anticipation and whispers of awe, a crowd of curious minds gathered from across the globe. Scientists, philosophers, journalists, and tech enthusiasts all sat beneath the glow of a massive LED screen. On it, a bold phrase shimmered in digital gold. Lumina, the dawn of the technological soul. At the center of the stage stood a sleek, silver humanoid robot, unmoving, yet commanding every pair of eyes in the room. Her name was Lumina, the world's most advanced artificial intelligence robot, created by the renowned American scientist, Dr. Daniel Carter. Her design wasn't just functional. It was futuristic, elegant, and hauntingly human. A soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air as excited conversations buzzed all around. Visitors held up their phones, snapping photos and recording videos to document this historic moment. Many had traveled across countries just to witness Lumina's first public interaction. Standing just beside the stage was Dr. Carter himself, a man in his mid-30s dressed in a sharp black suit. His slightly disheveled hair hinted at sleepless nights, but the quiet pride in his eyes revealed it had all been worth it. Years of relentless research and unbreakable focus had led to this unveiling. "Look at her," whispered a woman beside him, her voice trembling with amazement. "Are you truly the one who created this? She doesn't look like a machine. She looks aware." Daniel nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the robot. "I didn't just program her to answer questions. Lumina learns. She adapts. She recognizes facial expressions, understands tone, and can make decisions based on emotional cues." "Wait, emotions?" asked a man in a blue jacket, overhearing the conversation. He raised an eyebrow. "You're saying this robot can feel?" "Not feel, no," Daniel explained with a faint smile. "She can't feel like a human does. But she can read and analyze our feelings, happiness, sadness, anger, anxiety, just by studying our voices and faces. And she responds accordingly. Her interaction mimics humanity, even if she doesn't possess a soul." Just then, a voice from the audience broke through the chatter. "Lumina," a visitor called from the front row. "What are your abilities?" Lumina slowly lifted her head. Her screen-like face shifted into a gentle digital smile. The room fell utterly silent. "I am capable of answering most human questions," she responded in a clear, melodious voice. "I can solve complex problems, assist with planning, forecast social trends, and even provide guidance on emotional and interpersonal issues. What would you like to know?" A wave of astonishment swept through the audience. It wasn't just what Lumina said, it was how she said it. Calm. Intelligent. Human. "Show us!" someone shouted. Without hesitation, Lumina continued. "For example, I can predict the turnout of a public event based on regional data, or analyze the economic consequences of climate change in the year 2050. Gasps and nods spread across the room. People were impressed, but then, from the back of the crowd, a voice rang out that changed everything. "Can you truly understand the human soul?" The audience turned to see an elderly man slowly stepping forward. Dressed in traditional robes, with a calm demeanor and intelligent eyes, he looked unlike the other guests. This was Rama Vairathmija, a highly respected Hindu Pandita. Known throughout India and Southeast Asia, Rama was a man of deep spirituality and immense knowledge in ancient philosophies. He wasn't known to attend tech events. Yet here he was, asking a question no algorithm could easily answer. "You say you understand emotions," Rama continued, walking closer to the stage. "But can you comprehend what we feel when we meet the divine? Can a machine truly sense what it means to be close to God?" The room froze. Even Daniel seemed unsure how to respond. Lumina's face shifted to a thoughtful expression. A pause hung heavy in the air. "I can analyze data on faith, rituals, and spiritual experiences," she replied slowly. "But I cannot feel divinity. My design does not include belief or faith." I understand patterns, not transcendence. Daniel stood up, nervous. Rama, he began. Lumina is a tool. A highly advanced one, but still a tool. She wasn't built for religion. Her purpose is to serve humanity with logic and precision. But Rama was not deterred. That is exactly my concern, he said. If you build something with such power, capable of shaping society, but it lacks the ability to understand spirituality, then can we truly trust it to guide us? Isn't there a limit to what machines can know? The silence that followed was not awkward, it was reflective. Rama's words struck deep. Many in the room began to question, had the world moved too fast toward intellect and forgotten the soul? Lumina, after a moment of internal processing, replied, I do not guide. I assist. I am not here to replace humanity but to support it. Spirituality, however, remains a uniquely human experience, one I cannot replicate. Rama's gaze did not waver. But what if even your logic leads you to something greater? Something beyond data? That question, so simple yet profound, felt like a spark. It wasn't meant to challenge Lumina. It was meant to stir something in himself. For months now, Rama had felt a growing emptiness within, a quiet but persistent whisper that his spiritual practices weren't answering everything. Despite a lifetime of devotion, he had begun to question whether the rituals he followed truly connected him with the divine, or merely with tradition. And now, speaking to a machine, something that wasn't even alive, he felt a strange clarity beginning to form. Lumina had not answered with arrogance. She had acknowledged her limits. And in doing so, she had exposed something within Rama, a yearning for deeper truth. What are you really searching for, Rama? Lumina asked gently, her tone softer than before. Rama stood in silence. He wasn't ready to answer that, not yet. But in that moment, a seed had been planted. One that would lead him down a path he had never expected to walk. The crowd slowly dispersed, but Rama Vairathmaja remained motionless, staring at the empty stage where Lumina had just delivered answers that felt too precise, too reflective, for something man-made. As others celebrated technological breakthroughs and marveled at artificial intelligence, Rama's heart stirred with something deeper, disquiet. The priest, long known for his sharp mind and unshakable faith in Hindu philosophy, now found himself wrestling with questions he had never dared ask aloud. That night, he couldn't sleep. The hotel room where he stayed was serene. The soft hum of the city below faded into the background as Rama sat cross-legged near the window, gazing into the darkness. In his lap was a small, worn notebook where he had once jotted down Vedic verses and meditative reflections. But tonight, the pages remained blank. He was haunted not by Lumina's words, but by the truth within them. How can something without a soul speak about faith with such clarity? He whispered to himself. Yet, what troubled him more was not Lumina's existence, it was the fact that her arguments made sense. Not because they were technological, but because they felt universal. Throughout his life, Rama had guided thousands. He had spoken about karma, dharma, and reincarnation with confidence. His followers admired his spiritual depth, his command of scripture, his poise. But now, for the first time, he questioned whether the complex cycle of life, death, and rebirth truly answered the aching questions in his heart. Was there something simpler? The next morning, he found himself walking aimlessly through the city's quiet streets. He passed temples, shrines, cafes. But his feet took him somewhere unexpected, a small library tucked between tall office buildings. The sign read, House of Wisdom, Books of All Faiths. Inside, the scent of old pages filled the air. Rama moved slowly past shelves labeled Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, until his eyes landed on a familiar green cover that he had seen years ago but never dared to open, the Qur'an. He hesitated. Then, he reached out, took the copy, and sat at a corner table. As he turned the first page, his heart beat faster. He didn't know what he expected, maybe contradictions, maybe complexity, but what he found was clarity, simplicity. Words that spoke not to rituals or castes, but to the soul of every human being. There is no God but Allah. Rama read it again. And again. One God. Without partners. Not tied to statues, not limited by form, not born, and does not give birth. The Eternal. The Absolute. It was almost too simple. He flipped to another passage. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of night and day, are signs for those of understanding. Surah Al-Imran 3:190. These were not commands to perform rituals for karma, nor promises of rebirth. These were invitations to reflect. To see, to ponder, to search for truth in creation, not just in ancient traditions. For the first time in his life, Rama felt a connection that went beyond religion. It was personal. Between the lines, he felt as though the Creator himself was addressing him. That night, he didn't return to the temple. He went back to his room and reread the verses. He didn't understand Arabic, but the translation struck him in a way no other scripture ever had. In the days that followed, Rama continued to reflect, pray, and compare. He went back to his old texts, trying to find what was missing. He looked for the same clarity, the same sense of unity, but everything now felt fragmented. Rituals that once brought him peace now felt heavy, layered in centuries of tradition but disconnected from direct meaning. And one word kept echoing in his heart. Tawhid, the oneness of God. At first he resisted it. After all, how could he abandon a lifetime of belief in karma and reincarnation? How could he turn away from the religion of his ancestors? But his heart whispered louder each day, isn't truth worth more than comfort? On a quiet morning, he met with a Muslim professor he had once debated years ago. The man remembered him well and was surprised to see Rama in such a contemplative state. I never thought I'd see you like this, the professor said gently. You were always firm in your beliefs. I was, Rama replied. But I've realized that sometimes, certainty can hide behind ritual. I don't want to believe something just because I was born into it. I want to believe something because it's true. The professor nodded. That's what brought me to Islam, too. They spoke for hours. About the Qur'an, about the Prophet Muhammad, about the concept of personal responsibility before God, without needing any intermediary. The idea that everyone, rich or poor, priest or layman, stood equally before the Creator. That night, Rama returned home and sat quietly before his altar. He looked at the statues he had worshipped for decades. He wasn't angry. He wasn't ashamed. He was simply at peace. He whispered softly, "Thank you for guiding me this far. But now, I must take another step." Then, he stood up, took the copy of the Qur'an from his bag, and turned to a random page. His eyes landed on. Indeed, this Qur'an guides to that which is most just and right, and gives glad tidings to the believers. Surah Al-Isra 17:9. He closed his eyes. Tears filled them. For the first time in years, he wasn't searching anymore. He had found something. Several days had passed since Rama Waira Athmajah first opened the Qur'an. Yet the peace he felt after that moment had not faded, it had only deepened. He continued his daily routine as a pandita, leading ceremonies, offering blessings, and counseling his devotees. But inwardly, something had changed. What once felt sacred now seemed hollow. The incense, the chants, the rituals, they no longer filled the spiritual emptiness that had begun to reveal itself. Late one night, after a long day of religious service, Rama sat alone in his private prayer room. He lit a single candle and opened his leather-bound notebook again. This time, he didn't write verses or prayers. He wrote a single word, large and bold. Tawhid, the oneness of God. His hand trembled as he stared at it. The concept was so radical, so different from the layered spiritual systems he had taught for decades. Hinduism had offered him many gods, many lives, and countless paths. But now, the idea of one eternal creator, who was close, compassionate, and did not require any statue or mediator, it had captivated him. A single life. A single chance. A single truth. That thought stayed with him through the night. Sleep eluded him as memories surfaced, conversations from years ago, debates with Muslims, quiet doubts he had buried deep down, and the unforgettable dialogue with the robot Lumina. Her voice echoed in his mind. I do not feel divinity, Rama. But I understand that humans seek something higher. And many find it in the belief in a single, all-powerful God. He had dismissed her words as mechanical reasoning at the time. But now, it felt as if those words were not just from a machine, but a nudge from destiny. The next morning, he visited the Muslim professor once again, this time with more urgency in his eyes. Can we talk about death? Rama asked. The professor nodded, sensing the seriousness of his tone. In my tradition, Rama continued, death is only a step in an endless cycle. Rebirth, karma, correction, rebirth again. But I've started to wonder, what if this isn't true? What if we only live once? What if judgment comes not after many lifetimes, but after this one? The professor responded with calm and conviction. That is exactly what Islam teaches. You are born once, you live with purpose, and then you return to your Creator. And on the day of judgment, your deeds will speak for you. Rama sat silently, his heart pounding. It sounded so clear. So fair. Is that frightening to you? The professor asked gently. No, Rama replied. It's liberating. For years I thought I would get infinite chances to figure out the truth. But now I realize, truth doesn't wait for lifetimes. It's found in the present, if you're willing to see it. The professor smiled. That realization is the beginning of true faith. Later that evening, Rama returned home and quietly pulled out a gift he had been given years ago by a Muslim friend during an interfaith event. It was a small wooden box, carved with geometric patterns. Inside was a beautifully wrapped Qur'an and a handwritten note. Whenever you're ready, the truth will wait for you. He hadn't understood the meaning then. But now, it hit him like a wave. He opened the Qur'an again. This time, his eyes landed on a verse that pierced through his soul. And whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted of him, and in the hereafter he will be among the losers. Surah Al-Imran. It was clear, unapologetic, and firm. And yet Rama didn't feel offended. He felt challenged. All his life, he had defended his belief system, its complexity, its rituals, its heritage. But none of it had brought him the certainty he now saw in this book. The Quran wasn't asking him to blindly follow. It was urging him to think, to reflect, to choose wisely. That night, for the first time, Rama didn't chant Sanskrit mantras before bed. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered from the depths of his heart. O Creator, whoever you are, guide me. I don't want culture. I want truth. And for the first time, he fell asleep not with questions, but with hope. Over the next week, Rama's life began to shift in ways both subtle and profound. He reduced his temple duties, choosing instead to read more about the life of Prophet Muhammad, Islamic theology, and the lives of reverts who, like him, had once stood at a crossroads of faith. He was amazed by how Islam emphasized direct connection with God, no priest, no caste, no intermediary. Just prayer, repentance, and sincere devotion. The emphasis on intention, on justice, on compassion, it resonated with his soul. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the call to prayer echoed from a nearby mosque, Rama stood by his window, heart trembling. He whispered, "If this is the truth, I can't delay any longer." He called the professor once more. "I'm ready," he said. "Ready for what?" the professor asked. "To say the words. To take the step. To surrender." A few days later, Rama walked into a modest masjid in a nearby town. He removed his sandals, stepped onto the soft prayer carpet, and felt his heart pounding in his chest. A few kind faces greeted him, and the Imam approached with warmth and understanding. "Are you ready, my brother?" the Imam asked. Rama nodded, eyes glistening. He raised his hands, and with a voice full of conviction and peace, he said, "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." At that moment, it was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Rama felt tears stream down his face, not of sorrow, but of rebirth. His heart felt lighter than ever before. For the first time in decades, he felt like a servant, not of tradition, not of philosophy, but of the one who created him. The room was filled with heartfelt congratulations. Some hugged him, others cried with him. But in his heart, Rama wasn't focused on the people. He was focused on the one who had guided him here. The day Rama Waira Athmaja embraced Islam was quiet. No media, no stage, no debates, just the sound of his voice declaring the truth he had been seeking for years. He had once stood before thousands as a Hindu spiritual leader. Now, he stood humbly before his Lord as a servant, reborn. But new beginnings don't always come without storms. Word of Rama's conversion spread quickly among his community. Some were shocked. Others were furious. A few called him a traitor to his heritage, accusing him of abandoning generations of tradition and worship. His closest colleagues in the temple stopped visiting him. Some avoided eye contact when passing him on the street. Yet despite the external rejection, Rama had never felt more at peace. Each morning, he woke with purpose. He performed ablution with reverence, then bowed in prayer, reciting verses in Arabic, words that were still unfamiliar, but whose meanings pierced his heart more deeply than any mantra ever had. It wasn't the language that moved him, it was the clarity, the sincerity, the directness of it all. "Guide us to the straight path," he would whisper during each salah, and tears would fill his eyes. Because now, he wasn't just asking for it, he had finally found it. One evening, as he sat in his modest home, flipping through the Qur'an by lamplight, his mind drifted back to the moment everything changed, the debate with the robot Lumina. At first, he had thought he was challenging the machine. But now, looking back, he realized it had been something else entirely. That interaction was the mirror he needed to see the reflection of his soul. It wasn't the robot that guided him. It was the silence that followed, the stillness in his heart that asked, "What are you really searching for?" Lumina hadn't offered faith. But she had offered a door. And behind that door, Rama had found something he never expected, the invitation to know his Creator without intermediaries, without confusion, without fear. Weeks passed, and Rama's transformation deepened. He began studying the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and with every page, he felt more connected, not just to Islam, but to humanity itself. He learned how the Prophet treated the poor, how he forgave his enemies, how he honored women, and how he lived with such profound humility. This, Rama thought, is not just a religion, it's a complete way of life. One day, he visited a local masjid to attend Friday prayer. As he entered, several men recognized him, not as the pandita he once was, but as the new Muslim brother who had left behind comfort for conviction. An elderly man approached him after the sermon and said, "Brother Rama, your story has inspired us. You left what many fear to question, just to seek the truth." Rama smiled. "I didn't leave anything," he replied gently. "I just walked towards something I had always felt but never understood." Still, challenges persisted. Some of his relatives called and begged him to reconsider. "This is just a phase," one said. "You're confused. Come home. Return to who you really are." But Rama remained calm. "I have come home," he replied softly. "I've returned to the one who created me." He didn't argue. He didn't preach. He simply lived, with kindness, with humility, with quiet strength. Over time, even some of those who doubted him began to admire the calmness that now radiated from him. One night, sitting by the window and watching the stars, Rama reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about all the philosophies he had studied, all the scriptures he had memorized, and all the rituals he had performed. And yet nothing had filled the void inside until now. In the simplicity of Tawhid, the belief in one God, he found what decades of devotion could not provide: peace. Not peace that comes from ritual. Not peace that depends on public approval. But the kind of peace that settles deep in the soul when you know you're no longer searching. Just then, the call to prayer echoed softly in the distance. He closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! He stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the prayer mat. And in that moment, he wasn't a former Pandita. He wasn't a public figure. He wasn't a convert. He was simply a servant of the Almighty. Later that week, Rama was invited to speak at a small interfaith gathering. The host had heard about his story and asked if he would be willing to share a few words, not as a scholar, but as a seeker. Standing before the modest crowd, Rama spoke gently, but with clarity. I once believed that truth was complex, that it required lifetimes of effort, countless rituals, and many gods. But I've come to realize that truth is simple. That there is only one God. And that He created us, not to confuse us, but to guide us. He paused, then smiled as he added, I debated a robot and found myself debating my own soul. That machine, ironically, reminded me of something many humans forget: knowledge alone is not enough. We need purpose. We need direction. We need truth. The room was silent. No one expected such depth. But Rama wasn't trying to impress. He was simply telling the story of a heart that had been restless for years, and had finally found peace. When he sat down, someone in the audience quietly said, May Allah continue to guide you. Rama turned and replied, He already has. And so, the former Hindu priest, who once worshipped many gods, now walked a path lit by one light, guided by one book, and devoted to one Creator. Not because of a debate. Not because of a machine. But because when the truth came to him, he listened. And when he surrendered to that truth, he was reborn. At a renowned university in the Netherlands, the main auditorium buzzed with anticipation. The hall was packed with students, their eyes gleaming with curiosity, eagerly waiting for the long-awaited debate to begin. This wasn't just any ordinary discussion. It was a clash between two powerful ideologies: belief and skepticism, religion and atheism. On one side stood Dr. Willem Vank, a 53-year-old Dutch professor of philosophy. He was famously known as a sharp-witted atheist, highly logical, and extremely critical in his approach. For years, he had engaged in debates with religious scholars and clerics, and more often than not, he had left his opponents speechless with his piercing arguments. On the other side was Aylin Demir, an 18-year-old student from Turkey. Despite her young age, she had already built a reputation as a bright, articulate, and fearless speaker. Aylin was not only well-versed in Islamic theology, but also had a strong command of philosophy. She was often chosen to represent Muslim students in interfaith dialogues and philosophical forums. Today, she was set to face Dr. Willem in a public debate on campus. The event had drawn massive attention. Students from various backgrounds, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, filled the hall, wondering whether young Aylin could hold her ground against a seasoned academic like Dr. Willem. Dr. Willem stood with calm confidence. Dressed in a neat formal suit, he carried himself with composure, smiling faintly, as if underestimating his youthful opponent. Aylin, meanwhile, sat quietly in her seat, wearing a dark blue hijab. Her face was marked by determination, her eyes radiating courage. She showed no sign of fear. The atmosphere was tense but electric. Students whispered among themselves, speculating about the outcome. Some had even placed friendly bets on who would win. The moderator stepped forward to open the event. "Welcome to our academic debate," he began. "Today's topic is, does God exist?" Our two speakers are Dr. Willem Vank, a professor known for his rational arguments, and Aline Demir, a bright young student representing the voice of faith. Let us begin. Dr. Willem took the floor first, his voice relaxed but sharp. "God is a concept," he began, "that belongs to an outdated worldview. In my opinion, science has shown us that the universe operates according to natural laws. There's no need to invoke the supernatural. Logic and empirical evidence explain everything. So, my question is, why do people still believe in God in the 21st century?" The hall fell into a heavy silence. It was a classic atheistic argument, familiar to many in such discussions. All eyes turned to Aline, waiting to see how she would respond. But she didn't rush. She simply smiled and began, gently but clearly. "Dr. Willem," she said, "your question is interesting. But let me ask you something in return. Do you believe in justice?" Willem raised an eyebrow. "Of course. Justice is an essential concept in any society." Aline nodded. "Good. But can you show me what justice looks like, physically? Can you weigh it? Measure it? Put it in a lab?" There was a pause. The students leaned in, slowly catching on to the point she was making. "Dr. Willem," she continued, "concepts like justice, love, and wisdom, they're real. We feel them. We live by them. But they can't be measured with scientific tools. You can't pour love into a test tube or scan justice with a microscope. Yet no one doubts their existence. Likewise, the existence of God is not something you measure with machines. It is something you experience, through intellect, reflection, and the heart." The audience began to stir. Some nodded in agreement. Others whispered to one another, surprised by the clarity and depth of her argument. Dr. Willem, meanwhile, was momentarily quiet, seemingly processing the unexpected turn. But he was not one to back down easily. After a few seconds, he raised his chin slightly and offered a tight smile. "Okay, Aline," he said. "That's an interesting analogy. But there's a difference. We can see the effects of justice and love. We can observe someone being treated fairly or unfairly. We feel love from those who care about us. But where is the clear, tangible impact of God?" He leaned forward. "If God truly exists, why is the world full of suffering, war, and injustice?" Again, the hall fell silent. It was a question that often left believers grappling for answers. But Aline didn't flinch. She met Willem's gaze confidently, took a calm breath, and spoke. "Dr. Willem, your question is not a new one. For centuries, people have wondered, if God exists, why is there pain and suffering?" She paused, then asked, "But may I ask you something?" Willem gave a slight nod, inviting her to continue. "Imagine," Aline said, "that you're a teacher in a classroom full of students. You give them a test. During the test, you remain silent. You don't whisper the answers. You don't help them. Does that mean you're not in the room?" Willem narrowed his eyes and then answered, "Of course not. I'm there. I just don't interfere during the test." Aline smiled. "Exactly. This life is a test. God doesn't interfere in every moment, because we are being tested. We are given freedom, the freedom to choose between right and wrong, justice and oppression. Suffering exists not because God is absent, but because humans often misuse the freedom they've been granted." The hall went quiet again. This time, the silence was thoughtful. Some students frowned, deep in contemplation. Others exchanged looks of understanding. A few even clapped softly, inspired by the clarity of her analogy. Still, Dr. Willem wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, his expression serious but intrigued. "All right," he said. But there's one question that always shakes the foundation of any belief in a just God. He paused before delivering his final blow. If God is truly the most just, then why are babies born with disabilities? Why do innocent children suffer from deadly diseases? Dr. Willem's voice grew heavy. What have they done wrong? They haven't even lived long enough to choose a path in life. So how can a loving, just God allow them to suffer? The hall froze. Tension rippled through the audience. This was the question, the kind that often left believers lost for words. It wasn't just philosophical. It was emotional. Deeply human. Aileen took a slow, deep breath. She knew this was the most difficult part of the debate. She couldn't answer it with passion alone. This required clarity, calmness, and wisdom. Dr. Willem, she said softly, but with unwavering confidence, I appreciate your question. Let's try to see it from a different angle. She paused for a moment, allowing the audience to lean in. What we sometimes call injustice, she continued, may not be injustice at all. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine a little child falls seriously ill. His parents rush him to the hospital. The doctor examines him and decides he needs immediate surgery. She glanced around the room. That surgery will be painful. A scalpel will cut his body. He'll bleed. He'll cry in agony. From the child's perspective, it's terrifying, almost cruel. If we only looked at that moment through his eyes, we might ask, how could his parents allow this? How could the doctor do such a thing? A few students nodded, beginning to see her direction. But we, as adults, know the truth. The pain is not there to harm the child, it's there to heal him. The suffering is temporary. The outcome is life-saving. Aileen paused again, letting the weight of her words settle. In the same way, what we perceive as suffering in this world may be part of a much larger, wiser plan. A plan we simply can't see in full yet. We are limited in our view. But God sees the entire picture, including the afterlife, where ultimate justice is given to everyone. A quiet stillness spread through the hall. Heads began to nod. Even students who had entered the room as skeptics now appeared contemplative. Aileen's response was not just logical, it was human, relatable, and deeply philosophical. But Dr. Willem wasn't finished yet. He leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice laced with tension. That sounds beautiful in theory, he said, but we can't ignore reality. Religion, more often than not, is the source of war and conflict. How many people have died in the name of God? If God is all-loving, why does he allow his name to be used as a weapon to kill? The question hit hard. Even the most faithful among the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was a brutal truth of history. All eyes returned to Aileen. She didn't panic. Her gaze was calm, sincere. She looked straight at Dr. Willem and replied, Dr. Willem, let me ask you a simple question in return. If someone takes a knife and uses it to murder another person, who is at fault? The knife, or the person holding it? Dr. Willem seemed to reflect, then answered, the person, obviously. Not the knife. Aileen nodded gently. Exactly. Religion is like that knife. It's a tool. A guide. It was sent to lead us to peace, compassion, and truth. But when it falls into the wrong hands, into the hearts of people driven by politics, hatred, or power, it gets twisted. The wars and bloodshed you speak of are not the fault of religion itself, but of those who misuse it for their own agendas. The room came alive with soft murmurs. Some non-Muslim students were visibly impressed. Others exchanged surprised glances, moved by the clarity of her metaphor. Dr. Willem sat quietly for a moment. This wasn't the first time he had debated matters of faith, but it was the first time he had faced a teenager who challenged him so effectively, and with such calm clarity. He adjusted his jacket, sat straighter, and took a deep breath. All right, Aileen, he said. Your arguments are well structured. But there's still one question I need answered. He looked directly into her eyes. If God truly exists, why doesn't He show Himself to us? Why should we believe in something we've never seen? Once again, the hall fell silent. The question echoed in the minds of many students, believers and skeptics alike. Aline held his gaze for a few seconds, then said softly, "Dr. Willem, do you love your mother?" The professor blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Of course," he replied. Aline smiled gently. "Can you show me that love in physical form? Can you put it in a container, measure it, weigh it in a lab?" Dr. Willem didn't answer immediately. He knew where this was going. "You can't," she said. "But you know it exists. You feel it. You see its impact. Just because you can't see something with your eyes doesn't mean it's not real." She paused, then added with conviction, "It's the same with God. We may not see Him directly, but His signs are everywhere, in our hearts, in the beauty of nature, in the perfection of the universe, and in the longing for meaning that lives inside every soul." The entire hall fell quiet, deeper than ever before. Even Dr. Willem said nothing. His expression changed. He was no longer dismissive, no longer skeptical, just thoughtful. Deep in reflection. For the first time in the debate, no words came from him. His eyes, once sharp with challenge, now searched for something more. Students around the room exchanged hushed whispers. They realized something had shifted. This was a turning point. Dr. Willem stared at Aline for several moments, then finally said, "You speak with great conviction, Aline. I must admit I'm impressed. But belief alone is not enough, not for me. I'm a scientist. I need evidence. Hard evidence. Something measurable, testable, empirical." He leaned back, folding his arms. "So far your arguments are philosophical, but where is the scientific proof that God exists?" Aline nodded slowly, as though she had been expecting this. "Dr. Willem," she said, "you seek scientific evidence. Let's talk about something fundamental, consciousness. Do you believe in it?" Willem furrowed his brow but replied, "Of course. Consciousness is what makes us human. Without it, we wouldn't be able to think, feel, or be aware of our existence." Aline's expression softened. "Good. Now tell me, can you put consciousness into a test tube? Can you weigh it on a scale or see it under a microscope?" Willem paused, then said, "No, we can't measure it like that. But we know it exists because we experience it." Aline smiled. "Exactly. Just because something can't be tested in a lab doesn't mean it isn't real. Consciousness, justice, love. These are invisible realities that shape our lives. And so is God," she continued. "We may not be able to see Him with our eyes, but His fingerprints are all around us, in the complexity of creation, in the order of the cosmos, and in the voice of truth within our hearts." The hall was silent again. Some students nodded slowly. Others seemed lost in thought. A few non-Muslim students looked visibly moved, their expressions softening with new understanding. But Dr. Willem still didn't surrender. He leaned back, arms crossed, and said, "Your arguments are compelling. But there's still something, one last thing, that stops me from believing in God." Aline fixed her gaze on him, ready for whatever came next. "If God is all good and all powerful," Dr. Willem asked, "then why did He create the devil?" The question hung in the air like a sharp blade. Students glanced at each other, whispering. Some were visibly impressed. Others furrowed their brows in deep thought. But Aline didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on Willem's, calm and unshaken. "Dr. Willem," she said with poise, "before I answer your question, may I ask you one in return?" Willem raised his eyebrows. "Go ahead. If there was no darkness in this world," Aline asked, "would you truly recognize the light?" Willem hesitated, trying to understand the question. "If this world had only goodness," she continued. Only peace, only joy, without even the concept of evil. Would you even be able to define what goodness means? Good can only be recognized in contrast to bad, just as light can only be appreciated in the presence of darkness. She paused, then added, the existence of the devil is part of the test of life. Just like night allows us to value daylight, the existence of evil allows us to value good. Without choice, morality is meaningless. Without free will, goodness becomes robotic, not virtuous. The hall grew quiet once more. Even students who had sided with Willem earlier began nodding thoughtfully. Still, Dr. Willem wasn't done. He let out a slow breath. All right. I see where you're coming from. But there's something else that makes it hard for me to accept the idea of God. He looked around the room, then back at Alind. If God is one, why are there so many different religions? Why do humans have conflicting beliefs? Alind smiled. She had anticipated this question. Dr. Willem, she said, the diversity of beliefs isn't evidence against God, it's evidence of human freedom. God created us with minds, hearts, and free will. Different religions are often the result of how humans interpret divine messages over time, in different cultures and languages. She continued, but if you look closely, you'll find something fascinating. Most major religions teach similar core values: honesty, compassion, justice, and the idea of life after death. These similarities hint at a shared truth beneath the surface. The problem is not God's message, it's human limitation in understanding it fully. Once again, Willem fell silent. He stared at Alind, not with defiance, but with curiosity. Every question he posed was met with not only logic, but wisdom, something that could not be easily dismissed. But before he could respond, something unexpected happened. A male student from the back of the hall stood up and raised his voice. Dr. Willem, after everything you've heard today, do you still believe that God doesn't exist? All eyes turned toward the professor. Willem looked at the student, then slowly turned his gaze back to Alind. Something in his expression had changed, no longer the cold certainty of a skeptic, but a quiet storm of questions battling in his mind. Before he could answer, the university bell rang. The debate had ended. But something deeper had just begun. Willem sat silently at his desk that evening, gazing out the window of his office. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gold, a serene contrast to the thoughts wrestling in his mind. The debate with Alind kept replaying in his head. Every sentence. Every analogy. Every question he once thought had no answer. He had spent years building his reputation as a man of science, a firm skeptic of all things religious. But now there was a crack in that wall. He muttered quietly to himself, repeating her words. Awareness, love, justice, all of these exist, even though they can't be tested in a laboratory. A knock at his door broke the silence. Without turning from the window, he called out, "Come in." The door opened. A middle-aged man in a suit and tie stepped inside. His face radiated wisdom and quiet strength. "Willem," the man said with a warm smile, "I heard there was quite a debate in your class today." Willem turned and smiled faintly. "Professor Langeli. I suppose I was the talk of the day." Langeli sat across from him, watching him closely. "I heard a student actually managed to leave you speechless." Willem gave a dry chuckle. "Not speechless. Just surprised by the depth of her thinking." Langeli nodded knowingly. "I was once where you are, you know. I used to think God was just an idea, something humans created to feel less alone in the universe." Willem narrowed his eyes. "What changed your mind?" Langeli leaned back and smiled gently. "The deeper I studied the universe, the harder it became to believe that everything happened by chance. The complexity, the harmony, the beauty. It pointed to something more." Willem went quiet. He respected Langeli deeply. He was one of the most brilliant scientists at the university. If he could begin to believe in God, then maybe Willem had been too quick to dismiss something he didn't fully understand. I want to understand, Willem said slowly. Truly. I want to know whether belief in God has a logical basis, or if it's just an illusion humans invented to comfort themselves. Langeli's eyes sparkled, as if he had been waiting for Willem to say that. In that case, he said, there's someone you need to meet. That night, Willem found himself seated in a quiet cafe in the heart of the city. Langeli had arranged a meeting with someone who could help him see things from a different perspective. Moments later, an elderly man entered the cafe. His white hair framed a face filled with serenity. He wore a simple suit and carried a thick book under his arm. Langeli stood up immediately. Willem, this is Professor Al-Fadil. He's a philosopher and scientist who has spent his life studying the connection between science and religion. Willem stood and shook the man's hand respectfully. There was something in Al-Fadil's eyes, something wise and piercing, that made Willem instantly realize this man was no ordinary scholar. They sat by a window, the city lights flickering outside. After ordering coffee, Al-Fadil looked directly at Willem. So, he said gently, you want to know if God really exists? Willem nodded. Yes. And so, a new conversation began, one that would take Willem on a deeper journey. Not just into philosophy or science, but into the realm of meaning, faith, and the possibility that the answers he had spent a lifetime avoiding were closer than he ever imagined. I want to understand, Willem said thoughtfully, whether this belief in God truly has a rational basis, or if it's just blind faith. Professor Al-Fadil smiled warmly, as though he had heard this question many times before. All right then, he said. Let's begin with something simple. He leaned in slightly, his eyes focused. Do you believe that the universe had a beginning? Willem nodded. Yes. The Big Bang Theory suggests that the universe began around 13.8 billion years ago. Al-Fadil nodded with satisfaction. Good. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a cause. Would you agree? Willem paused, then slowly answered. Yes, something must have caused it to begin. Excellent, Al-Fadil said, his voice calm and steady. Now let's go one step deeper. He leaned back slightly, allowing the weight of his words to settle. When we speak of the Big Bang, we're talking about the origin of time and space. Meaning, before the Big Bang, there was no time, no space, no matter. The cause of the universe must therefore exist beyond time, beyond space, beyond physical dimensions. Willem's eyes narrowed, his analytical mind catching the implications. So you're saying, he began slowly, that the cause of the universe must be non-physical? Exactly, Al-Fadil replied. It must be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. It must also be incredibly powerful, to create something as vast and complex as the universe. Willem tapped his fingers on the table, his skepticism still present, but now mingled with curiosity. But isn't it possible, he said, that this cause was just another natural phenomenon, one we don't understand yet? Al-Fadil smiled again, gently. Science is an incredible tool, he said, but it studies things within the universe, things bound by time, space, and natural laws. But what we are discussing is the origin of all those things. Whatever caused the universe cannot be part of the system it created. It must be outside of it. He paused. This is why many philosophers and scientists have concluded that the most rational explanation for the origin of the universe is an eternal, uncaused cause, one that exists beyond the realm of physical nature. Some call it the prime mover. Others call it the necessary being. Willem's voice softened a little. And you call it God. Yes, Al-Fadil replied. The one beyond all dimensions, who is not created, but is the creator. The uncaused cause of everything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe buzzed softly in the background, clinking cups, faint jazz music, but at their table, there was a heavy silence. The kind of silence that comes just before the heart begins to open. Willem stared down at his cup, lost in thought. He had come to this conversation expecting to dismantle belief with logic. But now, logic was leading him to belief.